July 19th, 1977, the world teacher, the Christ Maitreya, head of the spiritual hierarchy, emerged from his ancient retreat and is now in the modern world. With his disciples, the masters of the wisdom, he will inaugurate the new age of synthesis and brotherhood.
Good morning and welcome to our World Teacher programme on Wellington's Access Radio 106.1 FM, presented by Teresa and David on behalf of Share International New Zealand.
Today we present a slightly shortened version of a two-part article sourced from December and January's Share International magazines. It's titled A Blueprint for the Future, Utopian Thinking by Corné Quartel, a Share International co-worker based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. It begins.
Why is utopian thinking so often met with scepticism? Our present political, economic and social systems are failing to address the growing inequality, the abject poverty in a world of plenty. It is safe to say that utopian thinking is not just an idealistic fantasy, but perhaps vital in redefining our future, a future that sparks feelings of positive anticipation, as opposed to the worrying and stressful reality portrayed by mainstream media.
Utopian thinking is not science fiction either, which can be entertaining, but very often just shows a dystopian continuation of present-day monotony and raw ugliness. A materialistic worldview in which human values and humanity's moral development is far surpassed by technology. Visions that bind us to an unsustainable and unlivable future.
In esoteric literature, many inspiring visions can be found of civilizations representing our highest values to help us visualize and think along more constructive lines. A comprehensive study was commissioned by the UN in 1980, which resulted in the visionary Brandt Report, with practical recommendations for global long-term stability.
Is it despondency? Many people, disappointed in the system, turn away from politics and fear that there are no solutions to the world's growing turmoil. So for them, a justifiable question is, do these utopian future visions offer real solutions, and are they feasible?
Compelling insights can be found in the ageless wisdom teachings, as well as forward-thinking policies such as presented in the Brandt Report and seen in other socio-political experiments, that illustrate how a society that shares more equitably and cooperates becomes much more efficient, and how people feel much happier, more secure, and have more leisure time without our present modes of hostile competition, confrontation, divisiveness and greed.
For those who are familiar with the ageless wisdom teachings, the notion that the whole universe is full of life and similar human life forms, and that we on planet Earth are not the most advanced civilization, does not seem strange. If we look at descriptions of advanced civilizations, it's interesting that although a society may be organized differently, the underlying morality, the human and spiritual values are similar and apparently universal. A beautiful illustration of unity in diversity.
So-called utopia is not a vague or mystical fantasy. A common definition is a place, state or condition that is ideally perfect in respect of politics, laws, customs and social conditions. This does not mean all people are perfect or enlightened, but that the system is. It sustains all life and creates the circumstances for people to grow spiritually, to expand their knowledge of the universe and the laws of life. It is not static. It accelerates the spiritual journey towards perfection, although, as esotericists know, the evolution of consciousness has no end, and perfection is therefore relative.
In Operation Survival Earth, the author, Stefan Denard, pseudonym for Ad Beers, and his family were stranded in their yacht on the submerged UFO, in which, over the course of a few days, he had conversations with crew members and screenings of life on a planet called Iaga, the inhabitants' name for their planet.
Utopia, they stated, marks only the beginning of a super-civilization, characterized by freedom, justice, and efficiency, where, by the right moral standards, people free themselves from selfishness and become harmless to their fellow human beings. Wonderful descriptions of housing, public transport, and infrastructure on Iaga paint a picture of a highly efficient and socially stable society in which people are freed from materialism because everyone's need is met. This is called the efficiency of justice.
This is not communism as implemented in the Soviet Union, whose aims for justice came at the expense of freedom, and which had its own inefficiencies because it was imposed on the people. Its control mechanisms resulted in corruption, demoralization, and indifference, with much human potential and creativity left unused or wasted. The system on Iaga is also much more efficient than our capitalist system, in which freedom comes at the expense of justice.
A crew member speaking to Denard said, "The free economy is based on the law of the jungle, the survival of the fittest, and keeping the status quo of the power balance, which necessitates military power. By automation and maximum production capacity within the boundaries of the ecosystem, maximum prosperity is aimed for. The prosperity is then fairly shared by everyone. Unlimited prosperity creates complete security." The crew members confidently claimed that the efficiency of justice could increase Earth's prosperity tenfold.
Instead of the numerous similar companies on Earth that compete fiercely, each doing their own research and development, marketing and so on Iaga, 2 worldwide consumer organizations are responsible for all market research and inform the public in the most objective manner about the available product range. A few large trusts with democratically chosen presidents are encouraged to arrange production and availability of the goods. It is simple and efficient, and many jobs thereby become obsolete, creating leisure time and freeing people from too much servile labour.
The trusts are not permitted to influence the consumer. According to them, our kind of advertising is an ethically unacceptable form of propaganda and infringement of our free will. In a socially stable society, there is not only freedom of speech, but also freedom to form one's own opinion.
Also, ethically unacceptable on Earth is inbuilt obsolescence, the intentionally shortened lifespan of our products in order to maximize profits. On Iaga, consumer goods are made to an incredibly high quality, because repairing them or replacing is not only costly but highly inefficient.
In Inside the Spaceships, author George Adamski is invited aboard a scout ship and a mothership to converse with crew members, and is shown life on Venus, which is on the etheric planes of matter, visible only to those with etheric vision, according to the Ageless Wisdom teachings. The conversations with a Venusian master on one of these trips are particularly inspiring.
You men of Earth continually invite disaster by creating combinations which oppose each other rather than working together. A bondage that is the result of centuries of accumulated misunderstandings, divisions and personal desire for power is difficult to break.
It can only come to pass when enough people realize what they are, souls, and are willing to work together and wholeheartedly for a better world by giving up their personal greeds and the desire for exaltation, one above the other. We of other worlds have no such divisions, but realize the relationship and the interdependence of all things. The Venusian master described human beings as an eternal manifestation in a universe as vast as eternity. Those who have learned this truth live in a constant present, for it is always the present.
People on Venus may dress and do many things in a similar way to us, but the difference clearly lies in their understanding of their true nature, of who they are. Since we have learned that life is all-inclusive, we are that life. We know we can hurt nothing without hurting ourselves. There is a natural law of balance by which we abide.
Adamski was shown several cities on the planet Venus, some large and some small. The streets were well laid out and beautifully bordered with flowers of many colours. They all gave him the feeling of having been transported to some wonderful fairyland. He describes cities following a circular or oval pattern, not in any way congested. Beautiful structures with no monotonous lines, and some with domes that seemed to emit a revitalizing force in prismatic colours. At night the colours cease and the domes become luminous with a soft yellowish light. The people on the streets seem to be going about their business in a similar way as on earth, except for the absence of rush and worry so noticeable with us.
Although we on earth may have a limited understanding of life, the composition of the universe, other worlds and ourselves, many people are showing a growing and sincere desire for greater understanding. The Venusian master says, the purpose of life on other worlds is basically the same as yours, inherent in all mankind, however deeply buried it might be, is the yearning to rise to something higher. We who have travelled the path you are now treading are willing to help and to give our knowledge to all who will accept it.
With greater understanding of our own spiritual nature and place in the larger scheme of things comes a greater ability to harness the laws of nature. When it comes to the technology they use for space travel, the suspension of gravity and drawing energy from the ether, the Venusian master said, "We would gladly give you this knowledge, except that you have not yet learned to live with one another in peace and brotherhood, for the welfare of all men alike, as we have on other worlds."
You're listening to the World Teacher Program on Wellington's Access Radio 106.1 FM. In From the Mundane to the Magnificent, author Vera Stanley Alder describes autobiographic events that took place in rural England during World War II, where she had regular meetings with an advanced human being called Raphael.
He showed her how to leave her body, to see and explore the similar, if not identical, energetic structures of an atom, a human body, and a solar system, illustrating that everything is interconnected, alive, and has a consciousness on different levels. He also showed her a vision of what life could be like if people were to live as intimate and benevolent servants of nature, instead of as ignorant exploiters.
Alder describes the landscape as seen from above. Beautiful sceneries of the countryside that followed the natural contours of the land, with no hedged-in fields denoting property boundaries. There seemed to be no ploughed fields and no cattle. Animals could occasionally be seen wandering at large in family groups, but there were no ugly towns, billboards or railway junctions, because the railway transport was all underground.
The airship in which Alder and her companion travelled was propelled by a clean form of atomic energy, noiseless, fumeless, and very economical. drawn from the air itself and stored and released by means of the manipulation of vibrations and colour rays, as Raphael explained.
Public highways were beautiful garden roads bordered by grasses, cereals, salad plants and herbs, which all people tended and planted with enthusiasm and delight. Rich stretches of fruit bushes and fruit trees were flanked by forests with a preponderance of nut trees. There was no large-scale cropping. The biochemistry of all plants and their action on the soil was carefully studied, and planting was always mixed, so that one type of plant helped another. This prevented pests and soil deficiencies. In all this wealth of harvest, with bees, butterflies and birds, everywhere people were observed to be happy, studying the soil together, planning the care of their joint land.
Animals were no longer exploited for food or clothing, and allowed to fulfill the economy of nature. As man himself was a beast of prey, this influenced the animals, and now man's duty was to eradicate the predatory instinct in the animal kingdom.
A small community town consisted of buildings that were laid out in a large flower-like design. A large building in its centre, from which smaller ones radiated, housed all the community's social needs, its club and entertainment centre, health services, industrial unit, prayer sanctuary and school. It also provided many other services like heating and laundry work.
Raphael explained that all people were craftsmen along some line, making beautiful things for each other. For this reason, shops were hardly necessary. People were self-governed, managed without money, and contributed to the government of their land and also to the world government. All surplus production in food and goods was exchanged for things they could not produce.
Alder asks, but could such a wonderful way of living ever really come to pass? Of course it could and will, exclaimed Raphael. It would come about fairly soon if we could break the world money complex. We're all slaves to money at present because we are first of all slaves to fear. Fear for ourselves, fear for our own security. We forget, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all else shall be added to you.
Seen from the air, London looked like a huge garden landscape, built upon flat roofs, with children playing and people tending their salad beds. No busy streets, no noisy traffic, but clean air, and only occasionally big buildings. It seemed very much an outdoor life. But what about the well-known British climate? Because of all the tree planting, had the climate reverted to what nature had originally intended?
Raphael says, correct afforestation regulates the moisture, disperses the winds, and subdues both heat and cold. When this is carried out all over the world, under the supervision of the world government, the world climate is changed for the better.
Alder then asked, Raphael, all this is very desirable and ideal, but what could possibly happen to change the world so much? Raphael describes how evolution must go on, and although mankind, with its free will, has determined to learn its lessons the hard way, the almost intolerable suffering and degradation thus engendered will stir and bring all that has been repressed to the surface. Being shown our present state so clearly, a great worldwide reaction of revulsion and aspiration will take place, and root out our terrible complacency.
The power of this spiritual revolution will reorient the total attitude of humanity to such a pitch that the whole world atmosphere or aura will change. This change will enable the greatest event in world history to take place.
What could this possibly be? According to Raphael, it was extraordinary how people remained asleep to the most vital things in life. This is supposed to be a Christian country. Christ told us that he would come again. The Jews believe in the coming of the Messiah. In the East they await Maitreya. The ancient Egyptians had it all mapped out in their amazing astrology. They spoke of the ever-coming one, who appeared in each great sign of the zodiac to give humanity its next lesson in evolution.
Yet, with all our history and research, we remain blind and asleep to the fact that this is indeed now the end of the age, of which Christ spoke. Therefore his second coming is closely upon us. The pulse of destiny is racing. The old and obsolete civilizations will all be broken apart. Humanity will be scattered in all directions. From the debris and the ashes, the phoenix of the new age will arise. A generation of new and unconditioned peoples will come to birth, to build a new age.
Alda and Raphael then left the craft and entered a large and beautiful college hall with an enormous television screen at one end and people assembling in utter silence. In a blazing golden light emanating from the screen, a figure appeared who, slowly and with very few words, seemed to instill meaning and realization telepathically, as if a great invisible intercommunication was at work. It was a world event, taking place regularly everywhere, and it was the highlight of people's lives. Regular meditation meetings would be held in all countries to amplify and study the new teaching.
The new teachings will give understanding of the human being's real function on this planet, of his techniques in helping with the evolution of the kingdoms in nature, with the international relationships and the new world economics, and they will give understanding of modes of living that would lead to a kind of world organism rather than a world government, and a global religion in which each faith will find its rightful place. Asking what she, Alda, could do to help, Raphael said to quietly make it known through writing, speaking and teaching, but only to those who seek.
It was in the early 1980s that the former Chancellor of Germany and Nobel Peace Prize winner Willy Brandt formed an independent commission on behalf of the United Nations with eminent members and leading figures in economics and industry to study world poverty. It was an important step towards setting our house in order as a prerequisite asked of humanity by the masters before their return to the everyday world.
The result was and still is probably the most comprehensive practical analysis of critical global economic issues to date. The North-South, a program for survival, generally known as the Brandt Report. It presents the need for change and the blueprints for a global sharing economy, not only as a moral imperative, but also to prevent long-term instability and global impoverishment.
Here are some recommendations from the Brandt Report. Issues facing the world would be better discussed by the leaders and representatives of every nation rather than by a small group of rich nations. A society of nations should be brought together with the issue of world peace and disarmament high on the agenda. World leaders should organize the provision of basic necessities such as food, clean water, health and medical care for everyone. The self-interest of the rich nations needs to be sacrificed in the short term if they are to ensure their own survival as well as that of the developing countries.
A large-scale transfer of funds from the rich to the developing nations would have an anti-inflationary effect on the North, would help the world economy out of recession in the short term and contribute to greater growth in the long term. The Brandt Report was well publicized, read and discussed, but 40 years later inequality and exploitation have only increased.
Such visions can only become real when we, the people, are well informed and from our own free will decide that we need justice in order to manage the world's crises and resources efficiently. Rethinking life's priorities with a saner and simpler lifestyle will contribute to worldwide prosperity, and life will become so much easier and more fulfilling for everyone, freed from insecurity, stress and worry.
Practicable blueprints for a fair and durable global economy already exist and are ready to be implemented. Such change doesn't mean that the rich countries have to live in poverty, since there are no shortages. Even with the current inefficiencies of capitalism, a 10% surplus of food per capita is being produced now. But it makes sense that the extreme wealth of the 1% that equals the combined wealth of half the world population needs to be addressed. Besides, the ever-growing inequality is simply not a sustainable option, leading, as it does, only to increasing social instability, international conflict, and ultimately self-destruction.
Raphael states that the destiny of mankind is very glorious. Men are learning to become gods. We will have to go through all the trials inherent in wrong living, such as war, disease, ignorance, until our ultimate revolt arrives, and we realize that we must make a stand for integrity at all costs.
We have come to the crucial point in our evolution when we realize that we need to stop accepting pain and sorrow as inevitable and courageously seek to turn away from the familiar path. Together we must come to understand that neither communism or capitalism, but the middle way, justice and freedom, is the only efficient and sustainable way forward. Sharing the world's resources not as a dogma, but as a heartfelt expression of that cohesive force called love. To quote Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done.
And that's our programme for today. Thank you for listening to us on Wellington's Access Radio 106.1 FM. And please tune in to our next World Teacher programme on Saturday the 13th of May at the usual time of 10 a.m.
You can listen again to this programme and previous ones by visiting our website at share-international-nz.info and click on the radio tab.